I'm Eleanor Carter, and I'm 67 years old. I've lived in the same little house in Maplewood my entire life, raising my son, Daniel, and quietly enjoying the years after my husband passed. I never imagined I'd be sharing a story like this, but here I am, speaking to you as if you were sitting right across from me at my kitchen table. Because what happened to me isn't just a story about family, it's about trust, boundaries, and realizing your own strength when people you love push you too far. It all started the day Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, stood in my kitchen and made it clear that if I didn't like living with them, I could leave. She sounded casual, almost kind, but the weight of her words felt like a punch to my chest. I had opened my home, my life, to help my son through a difficult time. I had thought temporarily was something we both understood, but in that moment, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, anger mixed with disbelief. I kept my calm and just observed her, silently wondering how I had ended up standing there in my own house, feeling like a guest. And that's when I realized I needed to tell this story, not to shame anyone, but to share the journey of what happens when betrayal arrives quietly, disguised as family. This is the story of how I discovered deception in the people closest to me, how I found my courage, and how, in the end, I learned that standing up for yourself is never too late. I need you to follow me carefully, because the twists in this story will keep you questioning what's real, who you can trust, and just how far some people will go when greed replaces love. This was only the beginning, and I never imagined where it would lead. I had always thought of myself as a careful, patient woman. After my husband passed, I settled into a quiet routine, my home filled with memories of us and the small comforts that made it mine.
Daniel, my son, had always been responsible, but when he lost his job at the accounting firm, I never hesitated to open my doors to him and his wife, Jennifer. I believed it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet. That was what he said, and I trusted him. Jennifer, however, carried herself in a way that made the house feel smaller, like it belonged to her. I remember watching her move through the kitchen, her eyes scanning the counters as if she had the right to claim every surface. She spent more time on her phone than helping with meals or chores, yet she insisted she was contributing. I forced myself to smile through the frustration, reminding myself that I was giving my son a second chance. At first, it was small things: the designer coffee, the trips she took with my credit card, claiming it was for family experiences. I told myself she didn't know better, or maybe she wasn't used to managing her money. But as months passed, the temporary stay stretched longer, and the unease in my chest grew heavier. I began noticing Daniel retreating into the background, letting his wife take the lead, even in decisions that affected our home. I remember feeling invisible during dinner one evening, realizing that the house I had lived in for decades, the walls I had decorated with care, had become a stage where I was no longer a main character. Jennifer's voice carried over the room with ease, sharing stories of vacations and social events, while Daniel glanced at me only briefly, almost apologetically, before returning to his phone. It struck me then how quickly a home could feel unfamiliar, how trust could be eroded quietly by repeated small actions that chipped away at respect. And yet, even as I noticed the imbalance, I still believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I thought perhaps a conversation could reset boundaries, that my son might finally see the truth of how their presence was reshaping my life.
I had no idea that what I was about to say in the kitchen that day would ignite the tension that had been quietly simmering for months. It was in that moment, standing by the refrigerator that I had bought, listening to Jennifer insist I could leave if I didn't like living there, that the first real spark of defiance ignited inside me. Up until then, I had been polite, accommodating, almost invisible. But something in me shifted, a deep, quiet insistence that I would not be pushed aside in my own home. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The tensions I had noticed, the small acts of entitlement, were just the surface of something much larger, something that would test every ounce of patience, courage, and ingenuity I had built over a lifetime. From that kitchen, I began to realize that my journey was no longer about generosity or temporary hospitality. It was about protecting myself, my home, and my dignity. And soon, the quiet life I thought I had would collide with deception I hadn't even imagined. As the months stretched on, I began noticing patterns I hadn't wanted to see at first. Daniel seemed to shrink into the background, letting Jennifer speak for both of them, letting her decisions shape the house I had lived in for decades. It wasn't just the designer coffee or the trips to Cancun she charged to my credit card. It was the way she carried herself like she owned the space, like my presence was optional, even inconvenient. I couldn't help but feel a growing mixture of sadness and frustration, questioning how someone could treat a home and the person who built it with such disregard. I started paying attention to every subtle act, the way she moved my belongings to make room for her things, the way Daniel nodded quietly instead of standing up for me, the way Jennifer dismissed any suggestion I made about fairness or contribution. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was grief, or maybe it was the natural friction of living together. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in the tightening of my chest, the cold knot in my stomach when I saw her scrolling through vacation photos on my tablet without a second thought. One Tuesday morning, as I tried gently to suggest that 8 months might have been long enough for a temporary stay, Jennifer's words cut me deeper than I expected. She made it clear that if I didn't like living with them, I was free to leave. In that moment, the quiet, accommodating part of me wanted to apologize, to pack my things and step aside. But another part, the part I had almost forgotten existed, snapped awake. I realized that politeness had been mistaken for weakness, that kindness had been exploited. That evening, I began recording our conversations, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. I reminded myself that I wasn't doing this to humiliate anyone. I was protecting myself, creating a record of the truth. And the more I listened to the words exchanged in my own kitchen, the more I saw the pattern of manipulation, Jennifer subtly twisting reality, Daniel deferring to her in every instance, their combined effort eroding my sense of control. The house I had loved, the sanctuary I had built, felt less and less like mine. Then came the moment I had anticipated, yet dreaded. Jennifer escalated. She called the police, claiming I had lost my mind. I remember standing in my own kitchen, the recorded conversation playing silently in my mind, feeling a strange calm wash over me. She didn't expect that I had prepared, that I had a voice that could be heard, even if others refused to listen. I watched as the situation unfolded, the shock and disbelief settling into the room like a tangible thing. Daniel was quiet, caught between loyalty to his wife and his mother, unable to defend either fully. And I realized something critical. I was no longer powerless. Every observation, every recording, every careful note I had taken was a step toward reclaiming control. In those tense hours, my emotions swung like a pendulum: anger at the audacity, sadness at Daniel's silence, fear of what might come next, but beneath it all, there was a determination growing. I wasn't going to be erased from my own life. And as I prepared for what was to come, I understood something else. Jennifer's confidence, her sense of control, was brittle. It had cracks. And if I moved wisely, those cracks could expose the truth. By the end of that day, I knew one thing clearly. I had to protect my home, my dignity, and myself, not through confrontation alone, but through careful observation, evidence, and the courage to act when the time was right. The house was mine, the memories were mine, and I would no longer allow fear or politeness to dictate my boundaries. It was only the beginning. Jennifer's next move, I suspected, would be more calculated, and I had to be ready. I felt the stirrings of strategy forming, the outline of a plan in my mind. What I didn't know yet was just how far this deception would go, or how deeply it was entwined with forces I had never imagined. I had barely caught my breath from Jennifer's calls to the police when a man arrived at my doorstep, dressed sharply and carrying himself with the air of authority. He claimed to be my psychiatrist, someone I had supposedly seen before, and he said my memory and mental state were of concern. I remember feeling a jolt of disbelief. This was a stranger. I had never met him. The way he spoke carried the clinical calm of someone trained to instill doubt, and I felt the first pangs of fear creep in. How could someone come into my home, challenge my mind, and make me question myself so easily as he questioned me, asking about the day, the president, even personal details? I realized I could respond fully and clearly. I recited everything: my address, my phone number, even the opening lines of Hamlet for clarity, and the paramedic and police officers present looked uncertain. They weren't sure what to believe. In that moment, I understood the gravity of what was happening. Jennifer had orchestrated this entire scene, and now she was trying to turn the law and medical authority against me. My heart pounded as I thought about what was at stake. If they believed him, I could be taken from my own home, stripped of control over my life and my finances. And yet, I could feel a part of me staying calm, observing, collecting every detail. I had always been methodical. I had spent years teaching, managing households, and handling finances. I could not let fear override reason. I reached for my phone and called my lawyer, Margaret Chen. The relief of hearing her voice, firm and unflinching, anchored me in the truth. I had rights, I had evidence, and I had someone who understood how these fraudulent psychiatric holds worked. As Margaret explained the man's past misconduct, it became clear that he had a history of participating in similar scams. My fear began to shift into determination. Jennifer had underestimated me. In those moments, I reflected on everything I had observed over the past 8 months: the way Jennifer moved, the way Daniel avoided conflict, the subtle manipulations. This wasn't a spontaneous attempt to unsettle me. It had been planned. Every detail of that morning, the call to the police, the arrival of a fake psychiatrist, the careful performance of concern, was orchestrated to make me appear incapable, to give her control over my life and my assets. But I was not incapable. I had clarity, evidence, and a lifetime of experience to guide me. I felt a spark of empowerment, realizing that this first major threat was also my first real opportunity to fight back strategically. I could see the cracks forming in Jennifer's confidence, even as she tried to maintain her composure. I would need to document everything, reach out to authorities, and remain patient. The stakes were high, but I had something they couldn't take: my mind, my resolve, and my voice. By the end of the encounter, I had decided I would protect myself and my home, not with anger, but with careful action and evidence. This twist had shaken me, yes, but it had also clarified my path. Jennifer's attempt to intimidate me had failed. I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had weathered the storm and was beginning to chart a course toward reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The days ahead would test me even further, but I knew I had already survived the first battle. I had begun to see the full scale of deception, and I understood that to truly protect myself, I would need to dig deeper, think strategically, and trust in the support of those who truly understood justice. And so, as the police left and the man in the suit retreated, I started planning, quietly, carefully. What I didn't know yet was how extensive Jennifer's schemes were, or how many other people had fallen prey to them. But one thing was certain: I would not be one of the victims. After that day, I realized I had to take control, not react impulsively. I began documenting everything, every interaction, every suspicious comment, every subtle attempt to unsettle me. I installed cameras in the house and kept detailed notes. For the first time, I felt a clarity that I hadn't felt in months, a sense that if I acted carefully, I could protect myself and finally see the truth. It didn't take long for patterns to emerge. Jennifer's past became a puzzle I had to piece together. Her previous marriages, each to older men with assets, suddenly made sense in a chilling way. Each husband had left something behind, each loss conveniently enriching her. I felt a shiver of recognition, but also a growing determination. I was not going to be her next target. I worked closely with my lawyer, Margaret Chen, sharing every detail, and together, we began to understand the scope of what I was facing. This was not just a family dispute. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to manipulate and seize control. Margaret helped me connect with authorities, and before long, I had the FBI involved. It was surreal to think that a woman like me, quietly living her life, would become central in exposing a criminal network. Throughout this period, I had to maintain a careful balance. I had to act normal, keep up appearances with Daniel and Jennifer, and avoid tipping them off. Every meal, every casual conversation became a careful exercise in observation. I reminded myself that patience and evidence were my greatest weapons. Anger could cloud judgment, but a detailed record, recordings, and careful strategy could bring justice. Then came the moments of empowerment. Each phone call, each consultation with the FBI reminded me that I wasn't helpless. The network Jennifer was part of was bigger than I imagined, but they were not invincible. I felt a rising sense of agency as I watched my careful preparations begin to bear fruit. The scales were slowly tipping in my favor. I thought about the people who might have been victims before me, elderly individuals isolated, their trust exploited. My mission became larger than just defending myself. I wanted to make sure no one else would fall for the same deception. That sense of responsibility gave me strength and clarity, fueling my resolve. By the end of these weeks, I had moved from a place of fear and frustration to one of calculated action. I knew Jennifer's confidence was fragile, and I was ready to expose the truth with patience, evidence, and legal support. The stage was set for the confrontation that would follow, and for the first time in months, I felt in control of my own life again. I also realized something important. empowerment isn't just about action, it's about perspective. I had learned to watch, to listen, to anticipate. I had learned that even in the most personal betrayals, clarity and patience could turn fear into strategy. And I knew, deep down, that the next twists would challenge me further. But I was ready. The house was mine to defend. My voice was strong. And I finally understood that courage often comes in quiet, deliberate steps rather than sudden gestures. What I didn't know yet was just how much Jennifer had underestimated me and how soon the next twist would force the truth into the open. The day came when I finally confronted Jennifer with the evidence I had gathered. I remember standing in the living room, heart steady, holding the recordings and documents I had painstakingly collected. For months, I had watched, listened, and prepared for this moment. And now, everything was laid out before me. Daniel was there, still unsure of what to believe, caught between the wife he loved and the mother who had nurtured him his entire life. As I revealed what I had discovered, I could see the shift in Jennifer's demeanor. The confidence she had carried for months, the casual arrogance, began to crack. Every carefully crafted story she had told, every subtle manipulation, was now exposed. I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction, knowing that the truth could no longer be hidden. The recordings spoke for themselves, and Daniel's eyes opened slowly, seeing his wife in a light he hadn't understood before. Watching her reaction, I reflected on all the months of quiet observation, all the subtle cues I had noticed, and all the preparation that had brought me here. It was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my home, and my dignity. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of the careful steps I had taken to protect myself and the empowerment that came with knowledge. I thought about the larger network, the victims who had been manipulated in similar ways, and I realized that my fight was not just personal. By exposing Jennifer, I was helping prevent further harm. The authorities moved swiftly once the proof was undeniable. I saw the weight lift from Daniel's shoulders as he began to understand how blind he had been, how much trust he had misplaced, and how vital it was to recognize manipulation before it consumed those you love. As Jennifer was taken into custody, I felt a strange mixture of calm and exhilaration. The house, once filled with tension and quiet fear, felt like it belonged to me again. I could breathe in the kitchen, in the living room, and in the rooms filled with memories of decades past. There was no triumph in malice, only in the restoration of truth and safety. In the days that followed, I worked with the authorities to trace the stolen assets and ensure that the other victims were accounted for. I realized that my courage and preparation had prevented a much larger catastrophe. The process was exhausting and emotional, but it reaffirmed something I had always known, that clarity, patience, and vigilance could overcome even the most calculated deceit. Sitting in my quiet home, reflecting on what had happened, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had not only defended my own life and assets, but had contributed to protecting others from the same fate. In those moments, I understood that justice was not always swift, but when approached with care, it was inevitable. And as I prepared to move forward, I carried with me a lesson that felt more personal than legal: trusting your instincts, protecting your boundaries, and speaking your truth can change the course of your life. It was a hard lesson, one learned through fear, observation, and quiet strength. But it was mine, and it had saved me. In the quiet, after the chaos, I finally sat in my garden with a cup of tea, feeling the sun on my face and the weight of everything that had happened slowly lifting. The house felt whole again, my home again, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without tension. I thought about Daniel, about the lessons he had learned about loyalty, trust, and the importance of seeing the truth clearly before it's too late. I felt a gentle pride mixed with the inevitable sorrow of realizing how easily someone could manipulate those they love. Reflecting on the experience, I realized the most important lesson was about boundaries and self-respect. Being kind and generous does not mean surrendering your life or your dignity. I had been patient, I had been observant, and I had acted deliberately when the time came. Courage isn't always loud or dramatic. It's often quiet, persistent, and strategic. I also understood something deeper. Sometimes the most meaningful victories aren't measured in dollars or possessions, but in reclaiming your life and protecting others from harm. By taking a stand, documenting everything, and trusting my instincts, I had not only saved myself, but helped prevent Jennifer from hurting anyone else. As I sip my tea and watch the world continue outside my window, I feel a profound sense of peace. I hope that sharing my story reminds others to trust themselves, protect their boundaries, and never underestimate the power of careful observation and thoughtful action. Remember, standing up for yourself is never too late, and sometimes it can change everything. If my story resonates with you, please consider sharing your own experiences in the comments and subscribing to the channel. Your voice matters, and sometimes telling your story is the bravest step you can take.